Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live and online exhibition opening for Folklore, Fairy Tales, and Other Worlds. And thank you for joining us here in the club rooms and for joining us out there on Zoom. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and host the event this evening. Tonight, we have more than 140 people who are planning to join us here in the club rooms or online. So for those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books. We have a scholarly journal and newsletter, and we have keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of programs and exhibitions, like the one this evening, on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining or rejoining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to go online to bccbooks.org to learn more about the book club, to join, or to donate. And now to the exhibition opening for Folklore, Fairy Tales, and Other Worlds. Folklore and fairy tales have been intertwined throughout their history. They are infused with mystical and mythical aspects, while their traditional elements gave rise to new and otherworldly creations. The exhibition that is now on view here at the book club includes 5 centuries of printed books and ephemera from the Book Club of California's Albert Sperisen Library. The exhibition spans 3,000 years of literature as it explores the ongoing human fascination with the mythical and the marvelous. The book club's librarian, Elizabeth Newsom, has curated this exhibition. Again, it's from the book club's own holdings. And tonight she will talk a little bit about the subject matter and the materials that are on display. Of course, we will leave time for a little bit of Q&A. So if you have questions for our speaker, please hold them to the end. We will have time to take questions from you out there on Zoom. You can use the chat and the Q&A functions on Zoom, and we'll call on you here in the club rooms. And of course, we will try to end early enough here so that folks in the club rooms can actually look at the exhibition after hearing about it from the curator. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce the book club's librarian. You all know and love her, Elizabeth Newsom.
Good evening and welcome to the opening of Folklore, Fairy Tales, and Other Worlds. It's wonderful to see so many friendly faces here tonight. I would especially like to thank Lee Jiang and Veronica Sutter, whose help with this exhibition has been invaluable and made the whole process much more fun for me. Humans are storytelling animals. There used to be a whole laundry list of things that we believed differentiated us from other animals, but research over the past decades has just knocked all of those things down like flies. But if any other animals create fiction, we have yet to discover it. Our stories tell us who we are and how to make sense of the world around us. And for as long as we've been recording our stories, we've been fascinated with worlds beyond our own. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, sorry, that was supposed to be the intro page. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh loses 2 objects, gifts of the goddess Inanna, when they fall through a hole in the ground into the underworld. He sits at the gate of the underworld, lamenting his loss, until his friend Enkidu offers to go and retrieve these. Gilgamesh gives him a whole set of instructions. Don't anoint yourself with oil, don't wear new shoes, don't do this or that, or the dead will detect you and not let you go. Can I have a show of hands how many people think Enkidu did as he was told? See, you know your fairy tales. And Kaidu violates the warnings, and he is trapped in the underworld until the sun god Utu breaks open a hole in the ground for Enkidu to return. Gates or doorways to the underworld appear in many stories. There are stories of men who go through them to retrieve lost wives. Orpheus in Virgil's Georgics, Coyote and the Nimipu or Nez Perce story about Coyote and the Shadow People. Odysseus doesn't cross through, but he goes right up to the gateway, which is inconveniently located in Cimmeria in the very far west. And this is treated as equivalent to any of the other locations that he visits in terms of being a physically accessible place. It's just one of many places that he goes on his adventure. Death is the quickest way to get there, but it's not the only way. In Ireland, we see something a bit different. In the Lebor Gabala Éireann, or Book of Invasions, we have a group of poetic and prose texts that together tell the legendary history of Ireland. We see group after group invading and conquering the island. And in the final invasion, prior to the arrival of the English, the Milesians came to Ireland from the Iberian Peninsula and warred with the Tuatha De Danann. When the Tuatha were defeated, they retreated to the otherworld, which is a place that has been variously described as a parallel world, a land beyond the sea, or a land below the Earth's surface. It's accessed by ancient burial mounds or passage tombs that came to be known as fairy mounds. The Tuatha themselves eventually came to be conflated with the Sidhe or fairies. Now, the Sidhe can cross between the worlds, and they can and do bring humans right along with them, no death required. Speaking of fairies, the term fairy tale wasn't introduced until 1697, when Comtesse d'Aulnoy titled her short storybook Contes de Fées, or Fairy Tales. And despite the newness of the title, the Countess was writing in an ancient tradition. Researchers at Durham and Lisbon universities applied a toolkit normally used in evolutionary biology to study the relationship between versions of 100 fairy tales to explore their roots and age. The results that I give with the caveat that they're not universally accepted and can never be proven suggest that Beauty and the Beast and Rumpelstiltskin are about 4,000 years old, and The Smith and the Devil dates back to the Bronze Age, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And this is the linguistic analysis they used to reach that conclusion about the Smith and the Devil. And even if these stories aren't that old, they fall somewhere within the oral storytelling tradition. The word folklore has about as many definitions as there are people discussing it. So for the purposes of this talk, I'll use folkloric fairy tales to refer to orally transmitted stories, and literary fairy tales to refer to those transmitted via print. That sounds kind of snobbish to me, but those are the traditionally used terms, so I'll stick with them. Writers of many of the early fairy tales gave credit to the oral tradition as the sources of their work. And Straparola's Pleasant Nights, which we see here, generally held to be the first printed book of fairy tales. He states in the dedication that the stories, quote, written and collected in this volume are none of mine, but goods which I have feloniously taken from this man and that. The matter is further complicated by the fact that fairy tales entered the world of print repeatedly over time, taken from folklore by writers who wanted to entertain, preserve, or provide certain lessons. At the same time that these literary versions were being written down, the oral and folkloric versions continued to coexist and be passed down at the same time. Meanwhile, stories could be remembered, retold, moving them from the literary realm right back into the folkloric. Everyone in here could do it right now. The boundary is distinct but permeable. 1697 is a big year in fairy tale history. Not only did the Comtesse d'Aulnoy coin the term fairy tales, Charles Perrault released his book, Tales of My Mother Goose, which is also the first time we see Mother Goose. While d'Aulnoy wrote new stories, many of Perrault's fairy tales were based on folklore, but with often major changes intended to appeal to their new audience. Take Little Red Riding Hood. It was originally a folklore tale warning children to be cautious of strangers. Perrault, writing for an upper-class French audience, made the story more overtly sexual and ended it with the moral that From this short story, easy we discern what conduct all young people ought to learn. But above all, young Mrs. growing fair, whose orient rosy blooms begin to appear, who, beauties in the fragrant spring of age, with pretty airs young hearts are apt to engage. Ill do they listen to all sorts of tongues, since some enchant and lure like siren songs. No wonder therefore 'tis, if overpowered, so many of them has the wolf devoured. The wolf, I say, for wolves too sure there are of every sort and character, some of them mild and gentle-humored be, of noise and gall and rank wholly free. Who tame, familiar, full of complacence, ogle and leer, languish, cajole and glance, with luring tongues and language wondrous sweet, follow young ladies as they walk the street, even to their very houses, nay, bedside, and artful, though their true designs they hide. Yet, these simpering wolves, who does not see the most dangerous of wolves indeed they be? Not subtle. In the Grimm brothers retelling, much like in an American version of a European film, the sex is toned down and the violence is amped up. Compared to Perrault's version, they added the mother's admonition to walk nicely and quietly and do not run off the path. And they also added the figure of the huntsman who cuts open the wolf and frees Red and her grandmother. As indicated by the title of their book, Little Tales for Children and Home, the warnings in this story were for little girls, not attractive, well-bred young ladies. The Grimm's warning isn't to avoid charming wolves, but to obey one's parents. Intriguingly, they also added an additional ending in which Red meets a second wolf, but having learned her lesson to listen to her mother, she and her grandmother kill the wolf together, and Red Cap went joyously home and no one did anything to harm her again. Listen to your mom. The 19th century saw a flourishing of original fairy tales. Hans Christian Andersen wrote 156 stories, released in 9 volumes. First, which included the story The Princess and the Pea, was published in installments beginning in 1835, and the last was published in 1858. Oscar Wilde's 2 books of fairy tales were released in 1888 and 1891. At the same time, we see the beginnings of what would today be considered fantasy literature, though their titles, like Dealings with the Fairies, The Princess and the Goblin, and The Princess and Curdie, all by George MacDonald, suggest that they were intended to be seen as part of the fairy tale tradition. And it's in fantasy literature where we see the real blooming of interest in other worlds. This interest has ancient roots. There's the Celtic otherworld that I mentioned earlier and the British Avalon, and it continues in the Renaissance with Sir Thomas More's Utopia. 150 years after the release of Utopia, in 1666, Margaret Cavendish published the early science fiction novel, The Blazing World. People debate whether this counts as sci-fi. I say yes, and I'm the speaker. Cavendish uses her novel to present what she believes is the method for obtaining a truly peaceful society. And she does it not through a lecture or a series of persuasive essays, but in the story of a young woman whose ship drifts through a portal at the North Pole into a fantastical realm called the Blazing World. And Moore and Cavendish stand at the beginning of a long line of writers using imaginary worlds to comment on the real one. There's a multitude of ways in which Alice in Wonderland can be read as social commentary. One is as a critique of imperialism. Alice is an English character who shows up in a foreign land which is governed by different rules, and because she doesn't understand them, she decides the rules either don't exist or are wrong. The croquet match is a perfect example of this. When she hears that the game is croquet, she assumes that she knows how to play, and that any deviations from the game are therefore errors. As she says to the Cheshire Cat, "I don't think they play at all fairly, and they all quarrel so dreadfully one can't hear oneself speak, and they don't seem to have any rules in particular. At least if there are, nobody attends to them." Alice goes from place to place, rather obliviously leaving chaos in her wake, because she can't figure out the appropriate behavior for the situations in which she finds herself. Alice in Wonderland can also be read as a progressive Victorian criticism of England's past, in a time when the monarchy was vastly more powerful than it had become by the time of the writing. In Wonderland, the laws, even the laws of time and space, exist at the whim of the Queen of Hearts. There's a scene where 2 pages are painting a white rose red because the Queen of Hearts wanted all red roses planted. And if she sees a white one, she will order the beheadings for accidentally planting white. Pretty harsh. And as the Queen represents the older order of monarchy, her harsh portrayal also stands as a criticism of the neo-medieval romanticism that was making the rounds at the time. By placing Alice against the Queen of Hearts and having her ultimately triumph during the Knave's trial, Carol celebrates the triumph of modernity and reason over romanticism. Most of Oscar Wilde's fairy tales take place in a magical, otherworldly place where statues and swallows can talk. In his essay, The Soul of Man Under Socialism, for which he was firmly in favor, he argues that charity can only ever be a stopgap measure and that the proper aim is to try and reconstruct society on such a basis that poverty will be impossible. His fairy tale, The Happy Prince, tells the story of a statue who, upon witnessing the suffering of the people living around him, has his friend the swallow pluck off all his gold leaf and his gemstone eyes to be given to the poor. The initial reaction to this is that the prince is a good figure, Christ-like in his self-sacrifice, and therefore laudable. But the fact is, his gold and gemstones are nothing more than bandages. They'll be sold, that money will be spent, and when it's gone, cold and hunger will return, and those sacrifices will have ultimately changed nothing. Of course, imaginary worlds are for adventure as well as critique. And the wood beyond the world, part of that neo-medieval romanticism that Carol was not a fan of, William Morris sends his hero, Golden Walter, across the sea and into the world of the lady, whose house is at the center of the vast wood. From there, he goes to the land of the bear people, and by virtue of choosing a suit of armor over a set of robes, he is made their new king. It's Morris's revolutionary take on a medieval chivalric romance, and it's definitely a fun one. About 20 years before The Wood Beyond the World, Jules Verne sent his own hero on a whirlwind adventure. Phileas Fogg, a London gentleman, is at his club one evening when the conversation turns to an article in the Morning Chronicle claiming that since a new railway has opened in India, it's now possible to circumnavigate the globe in 80 days. When other club members are unconvinced, Phileas bets them half his wealth that he can accomplish the task. And again, this is Jules Verne, author of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Journey to the Center of the Earth. And circumnavigating the globe in under 3 months is treated within the story as being about equally plausible as those other adventures, or less. And the question of internal plausibility is a significant one. While modern fantasy may present fantastical elements as being taken for granted by its characters, it's by no means guaranteed. Curious and curious, says Alice. When Disney updated the story of the Frog Prince, the moment the prince speaks to Tiana, her reaction is not, I'm going to kiss him and marry a prince. It's, a talking frog, which is exactly how any of us would react. It's funny because our expectations are subverted, but she is perfectly reasonable in her reaction. In 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the narrator, Professor Aronnax, describes himself as astonished, amazed, and stunned throughout the book. He even says at one point that the sight was so amazing that Victor Hugo alone had the skill to describe it. So let's compare this to the Odyssey, in which those words of surprise appear far less frequently, and when they do, they are describing the events that are happening back home. Penelope is astonished by her suitors, but Odysseus takes Cyclops in stride. The only time Odysseus is described as being amazed is after witnessing the nimbleness of King Alcinous's dancers. This is a hallmark of stories from the ancient world. Enkidu's visit to the underworld is likewise plausible, as are stories of the Sidhe replacing human children with changelings, and wolves dressed up like grandmothers, and talking frogs and racing tortoises, and frogs who really didn't want those sour grapes anyway. And yet, in an age when we view fantastical things as impossible, matters for fiction rather than real life, we still tell stories of little girls in red capes, of a man who goes to a land of miniature people, of a princess who did kiss that frog, of a sailor whose crew was turned into pigs. We crave stories that stretch our imaginations even when we deem them impossible. We keep on telling our stories because our stories tell us who we are. Thank you.
Thought there was one more slide. So that's what I was.
Oh,
It's all good. We have some time for some questions. So let's see if we have any here in the clubrooms. Any comments? Yes, Carol.
You mentioned that the Grimm brothers version of Little Red Riding Hood was Red Cap, or called her Red Cap. What is a riding hood? And do you know how that evolved? If there's any significance in it?
So the question is about the Grimm brothers version being Little Red Cap rather than Little Red Riding Hood, asking about the development of her name. I believe Riding Hood is that she's wearing a red cape that has a hood on it. And the German Rotkäppchen is Little Red Cap. How we got the different names, I cannot tell you.
I think her garb is different. She just has a red cap. It's not a coat. Not that you read the German. That's
I have read the German, but it's been a while. Her red cap is what I remember as being her distinctive mark.
Rotkäppchen.
Yeah.
It's always a small hood, a small hood.
Yeah.
Other questions? I'm gonna check Zoom. Sure, Matthew.
And of course, people are still trying to write fairy tales. Have you ever read Tolkien's Leaf by Nickel?
No, I have not read Tolkien's Leaf by Nickel.
Fortunately, that's not published.
So
He describes it as a modern.
So a modern fairy tale that might be audience limited.
Oh, I don't.
Or
Kate.
Did I hear correctly that Beauty and the Beast is 4,000 years old?
it is theorized that it might be based on the appliance of evolutionary biology tools to the linguistics of the story. That I don't think the article mentions. They traced most of these back to the Indo-European, but I don't think that they discussed the geography of it.
So shocked. Disappointed. I thought it was Disney. Were the fairy tales that started being written down and appearing in books in the 17th century written for children, or who was the audience?
And the question was on the audience of the early recorded fairy tales. Italian authors like Giovanbattista Basile and Straparola were writing more towards adults. Perrault was writing for adults. Comtesse d'Aulnoy, mostly adults, but I think slightly more widespread in her aim. And then the Grimm brothers were writing at the beginning of the 19th, and they were aiming at children.
Do you have any sense of when fairy tales became children's literature?
When fairy tales became children's literature, I think that it would have been throughout their history. That it's fairly recent that we have a distinction between children's and adults literature. It was just, these are the stories. So I would say that probably it was in the 17th, 18th century that we see the split in which target they are for.
John?
What you might look at it as a background of this would be the whole concept that most of this was probably oral, right?
Oh, yeah, they were
And
all
if you
oral.
look at it like the Oghams, include a couple of the Oghams that did the Langston for children. It's the Oxford Ogham. They have a theory that as groups of children are together, at ages, they repeat stories. And then they're forgotten as you get older, or they drop out of it. And they're always, they talk about this linguistic levels of age, that they're all among these children. And it's in the playgrounds, it's the play games, all that. But that they just go by strata of age. And I think that may be part of it, is there wasn't that photo publication, publication is a very high level sophisticated thing. You see now with the computer stuff, everything is moving into higher and higher levels of technology. You have kids that are watching screens at the age of 6 months.
So, you know,
And it happens. It's a fact of life.
terrible.
Well,
Can,
I
can
was
you,
one. But
can you remind the Zoom audience what this image is?
Oh, this is The Riders of the She by John Duncan. So this is the Tuatha De Danann out possibly hunting for some children to steal and replace with changelings.
the image is 19th century.
1911.
We'll take 2 more questions. Alan, you have one? And then Jeannie.
Do fairy tales always have a mystical beast?
Do fairy tales always have a mystical beast? They generally have some type of a mystical element, although they do focus on human characters. I'm trying to think of any that don't have any sort of a mystical element. Probably the talking bears of Goldilocks are a little less fantastical than Rumpelstiltskin. Oh, Three Little Pigs, yeah.
I just finished reading Checo's, or Checo wrote, illustrated The Monkey King, and he's a trickster. And I was thinking about the trickster through folk tales. Can you address a little when that started showing up? Has it always been there, folk tales? It seems to me it's in American Indian folk tales. It's in other folk. And till Eulenspiegel, it's in different folk tales.
The question is about when the figure of the trickster appeared in folk tales. I cannot give you a good answer for
Can
that.
you talk a little
Can
bit
we-
about the trickster folk tales?
Sure. The trickster is a figure who's not necessarily either a good or bad character, but they're an agent of chaos. And so whatever is happening in the story, they're going to show up and make things more difficult for everybody.
The Burr Rabbit.
Yes, for rabbits, wonderful one. Coyote, Anasazi, not Anasazi, sorry.
It sounds like me. I'm the trickster. Show up and cause all kinds of chaos. Please join me in thanking our presenter, our curator, Elizabeth Newsom. Yeah. I'll jump in here. And Elizabeth has prepared a nice little exhibit guide to the exhibition. If you're out there on Zoom and you'd like me to send you one, please email me. I'm kevin@bccbooks.org. I will send you out one of these little booklets, or we can give you a PDF to it. And if you are here in the club rooms, please grab one, take a look at it. It explains the items in the exhibition, and take a good look. Thanks everyone for coming. We look forward to seeing you at another book club program soon.